I am in this moment looking at you, standing here and acknowledging and admitting that I am horribly depressed. Right now, in this moment, I'm depressed. And I feel great that I can say that to you. Because depression has been such a big part of my life that it goes back decades. It goes back down the line of my family, my father in particular. And when I stand in front of you like this and just say the simple words and the simple acknowledgement, I am depressed, is something my father would never had the opportunity to do. My father lived most of his life pretending he wasn't depressed. And then when he had episodes, which are quite severe, including shock treatment, those types of things, when we were kids, my brother and I, we used to know that there was sad dad, and then there was happy dad. There was up dad, there was down dad. And that was okay. We didn't know anything about stigma when we were little, because it just was. In a way, I kind of thought maybe everybody's dad was like that. Up dad, down dad. Up dad, down dad. I remember specifically, though, even though this was such a big part of my life and I knew about it, I still didn't like it. And if my dad was down, and through your own experiences, or if you've witnessed somebody going through a depression or a depressive episode, it can look like many different things. So for my dad, he would sit in one place for an entire day and stare at the same teacup, wouldn't dump it, wouldn't refill it, just stare at it. And I remember being little and thinking, if I could just make him laugh, if I could just do my cartoon voices, because we watched Looney Tunes every Saturday at 5 o'clock. That's how old I am. It was only on once. Say that to my kids now. What do you mean? 5 o'clock Saturday nights. Bugs Bunny, Roadrunner Hour, Kraft pizza in a box. Anyone here remember Kraft pizza in a box? You do, don't you, Sharon? You do, gross, right? But the dough was just kind of like that, and we'd spread it on a cookie sheet, and then we'd take out that little packet of like grass clippings, and then you'd put that on there, and then, I don't know, tomatoes or something. It was such a thrill for us. It was so simple. And Dad was such a big part of that because he made sure that we were laughing, that we were having a good time. He did all the voices, and he did them well too, actually. Did all the voices. Comedy was such a big part of our lives that when the down times came, even though I didn't like it, I knew that they would pass. And I knew that somehow my dad had passed on that humor to me. He'd passed it on to my brother, which is a lifesaver. How many of you rely on humor in your daily lives? Right? Pretty much all of you. Sometimes at other people's expense, and that's okay. I laugh when people fall, and that's not very nice. First, I ask if they're okay, and then if they are, all bets are off. So I'm not saying I have sophisticated humor. I'm just saying I have humor. And out of all the coping strategies that have ever been given to me or handed to me or taught to me, humor has always been sort of that foundational piece. So right now, in this moment, I'm depressed, and I generally have a depression, the change of seasons. You know, a lot of times, generally the fall, it's usually when, it's 4 o'clock and it's dark. And it can be really taxing and it can be really difficult. And it's really difficult right now. I will leave here today and I will lie down. And that's okay. Then I'll get up later maybe, watch a little Frasier, watch a little Everybody Loves Raymond, and go back to bed. And that's okay too. Because that's what I'm going to need to do. My father would never have been able to say that. What do you mean you're depressed? Come on, come play cards. Let's go play hockey. Let's go golf. Let's go this. Let's go that. I'm just picturing my dad right now as I'm saying that, saying to his poker buddies, I'm too sad to play poker. It just wouldn't have happened. Support groups? Are you kidding? What? Why? Wouldn't have happened. Amazing, groundbreaking programs like the partial hospitalization program, which, by the way, my dad would have been in there. What do you mean? There's nothing like that. We don't talk about this. I go to the 10th floor at the hospital. My father went to Centenary. I go to the 10th floor, I see my doctor, I get my prescription, I come home. That's it. That's the end of my treatment. That's the end of really acknowledging in a semi-open way that he had this illness. And I'm standing here and I'm depressed, and I can say it as many times as I want, and pretty soon you're going to say, yeah, we get it, point made. But it's that important because people still don't talk about it. People are still embarrassed by mental illness. People are still stigmatized, as we know, all too well, sadly. One of my biggest challenges, though, in my story from the time I was very young was the whole idea of self-stigma. I didn't have any ill thoughts about my dad. As I mentioned, I thought he was my cool dad, and that's just how it was. Why on earth I didn't afford myself that same compassion, I have no idea. But I was stupid. I was lazy. I was disorganized. I had what I used to call monkeys in the brain, rats in the attic, in the basement, because I went back and forth through most of my childhood and into my early adulthood, all the way up to probably the age 40. Back and forth. What is this? Terrible depression, mania. Terrible depression, mania. I know a lot of people don't necessarily need to be diagnosed. You don't need to be diagnosed, by the way, to have issues with your mental health. Agreed? Can you just have an issue with your mental health? Can you have a crappy day? Yeah. And by the way, I was re-diagnosed 2 years ago with bipolar disorder, which makes so much sense to me. It makes so much sense to my family. You might think it was terrifying to get that diagnosis. For me, it was super freeing because I knew what the heck I was dealing with, right? But you don't have to have this dramatic diagnosis to struggle with mental health issues. Loss of a job, loss of a marriage, kid getting into trouble, trying to have a kid, loss of a parent, you name it, the list goes on. And you know what that's called? Life. Do you ever feel that some days you're really good at managing life? I got this, right? This is easy, I can do this. And other days where it's very difficult to see your way to the end of the day. It's very hard to see yourself going home and feeling good. Everybody has struggles with mental health because the brain is an organ in your body, therefore it is a physical condition. And if I hear one more time that those things are separate, well, I just don't know. I may not be responsible for the outburst. How can it not be a physical illness? Tell me, how? The brain. Our behaviors, our emotions, all of the things that are messaged through our brain, anyone can struggle with at any given moment. The tough thing about having a diagnosis, though, and I will say it doesn't get much easier for me, I still want to know why. I still want to know how come I woke up last Wednesday feeling like I couldn't get out of bed. Nothing externally was happening in my life to give me that feeling. I have a great marriage. My husband worships me, and why wouldn't he? He'll do anything I say. Eye roll. Kids are good. Christmas is coming. I like Christmas. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It was on the other day. The Grinch. When I'm in a depression, though, and maybe you can relate to this, and you've probably heard the phrase, the mask, right? You wear the mask. We do that in all kinds of different situations. When I have the energy to use the mask, it appears that I am present. And I've learned a long time ago that sometimes that has to be good enough. Appearing present has to be good enough. It hasn't connected here and here yet. There's a hollowness. When I'm depressed, it's not sadness. When I'm depressed, it is emptiness and an unmooring. If you were to imagine a boat being sort of the rope taken off a deck or a dock, floating, that's kind of how I feel. And then if you add to that mixed, with my bipolar, I have what's called bipolar 2. So I have hypomanic episodes from time to time. Not that often, thank goodness, anymore, once I got that sort of under control. But how that felt to me was, I wasn't exactly flying as high as a kite, but I was the tail of the kite. So I was still flying, but not so alarmingly high. So all of this became a regular part of my existence. And even though over the years I started to accept that this is how it was going to be, It doesn't always answer the question why, and can we ever answer the question why? I don't know, probably not, but I don't think I'm going to stop asking it. Because sometimes I feel really, really sorry for myself. And some days I really like that. And I want you to think about this for a minute. The times that you've been really sad, down, depressed, there are moments you want to wallow, and it feels good. Poor me, why doesn't anyone love me? No one cares for me. And I really make a meal out of that. And I go to town with my woe is me. And then at the end I say, okay, moving on. Let's try to figure this out and move on. And by figure out, I mean let's try to manage this to the best of my ability. And mental illness is hard to manage. Would you agree with that statement? Is it unpredictable? It really ticks me off when I have an episode and it gets in the way of my life, gets in the way of something I want to do, somebody I want to see, somebody I want to talk to. I really resent that. I accept that it's happening, but I really resent it, I have to say. So, growing up with this and having to beg off on certain social functions or not fulfill promises, which really crushes me, but I've broken a lot of promises over the years because of this illness and because of the behaviors I've chosen because of this illness. But right now in 2018, by no means are where we need to be, but my God, we're on our way, because I feel that I can say to somebody when they're asking me to do something, I don't think I can do that, I'm not well enough. I'm depressed. I'd love to see you, and I would. I don't stop loving you or caring about you or wanting to be around you when I'm depressed. I simply can't. I can't. And you know what? I don't know what that person is thinking on the other end of the text or on the other end of the phone. Perhaps they are saying, okay, and rolling their eyes. And that's all right. I can't make you understand how I feel about my mental illness. I've spent a lot of years, I'm 50 now, I've spent 40 years probably jumping up and down trying to get people to get it. You ever try to explain your illness to somebody? They'll never get it. Why won't they get it? Anybody tell me, why won't they understand? How can they not understand? They're not living it, exactly. They're not living. I can have a general idea, maybe, kinda, but I don't know specifically what you're going through, but I can empathize and I can show compassion, and that's my job to do that. If I want to create that kind of atmosphere of safety for people, I want to know that I'm putting it out there so that I can get some of it back. Because there's a little bit of selfishness at play here too, right? If I create an environment, a welcome environment, a safe environment, then perhaps when I need it, it will be there. It will be there for me. So I can say to people, and I choose to say to people, you know what, I'm not well. No, I can't. I've messaged people back to, right now is not a good time for a phone call. I can't even think straight. I can't think straight. I can't form my words. Imagine me. I can't form my words. That is a fate worse than death. I'll tell you that right now. If I can't talk clearly, what? But I do. I let people know that this is what's going on with me, and then it's up to them to decide what they're going to do with that information. And, you know, the distressing thing about mental illness that I've learned over the years is that sometimes you do lose people. Why? Why do people step back? Okay, they don't understand. What else? Yeah. There's a fear attached to it, right? There's fear I might catch the crazy. Or I don't know what to say. What if I say the wrong thing and I set her off? Because clearly I'm a time bomb. So they step back. It's not comfortable for me to talk about your mental illness. It gives me the willies. It gives me the creeps. I don't like it. I'm just going to go and find a less damaged friend if it's all the same to you. And then I would try to stand in front of them and say, but it's me. But it's still me. It's me. That's great, but I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to know this. I don't want this in my world. And that's a tough pill to swallow, no pun intended. That is difficult when you realize that not everybody is going to be your support. I used to want to make people be my support. You can ask my husband during the Q&A. I'm sure he'll come up and have a microphone and go to town. But but you cannot. And the whole idea that we must explain ourselves, we must rationalize. And for me, I would ask permission. Is it okay for me to be this way? It's not? Okay. Then I will pretend that I'm fine. And you spend a good deal of time pretending that you're fine. And that's exhausting too. Isn't it exhausting? To paint that smile on your face, your teeth are drying out, you're smiling, everything's good, everything's fine. So, throughout this process, and in particular the last 2 years when I received this sort of more dramatic diagnosis, I started to tie things back to memories. One of the things that I do in my life is I teach or I instruct storytelling, personal storytelling. Because for me, stories are what connect us and stories change the world. So I was thinking like a storyteller. I was looking at these experiences, and I said a few minutes ago how this made sense to me. I wasn't necessarily crazy about this diagnosis, but it made sense to me. And then I would go back sort of through the files, the ancient files of my brain, and be thinking about experiences, and a little light bulb would go off. Yes, okay. Why might that have happened? Okay. Oh, I see what I did there. See what happened in that relationship. Never blaming myself, because I do an awful lot of that too, and I bet most of us, mental illness or not, we blame ourselves for a lot of stuff, because somehow we have the power and control to make every exchange we have successful. And then when it isn't successful, then somehow it's our fault. So as I was writing this book and taking my experiences and teaching storytelling and learning more about the process of storytelling myself and learning about advocacy, I started making all these connections. I started really thinking about my dad. And my father, who has since passed away, in 1957 was when he had his first episode, and he was 17. And he had to drop out of school. And he was pretty devastated, apparently, that he had to drop out of school because he wanted to finish high school, and as was the time, he wanted to get a job and marry my mother, because my mother was in love with my father from the time she was 11 and he was 13. So they were going to get married. And this happened, or this surfaced, or this was part of who my dad was. And my grandmother, God love her, she took him to a psychic. She took him to a chiropractor. She took him to a naturopathic doctor. She took him to a psychiatrist. She had him get massages, you name it. Whatever she could do to help her son not be sad. But they didn't talk about it. My mother stuck around. Amazing. Because even at that young age, and even in that era of silence, she knew it wasn't his fault. She knew it wasn't his fault. So they stayed together. Silently, he got treatment. He lost jobs 3 times due to mental illness because there was no support. And even if people were compassionate on the job, they still said, we can't do anything with you. If you're not going to be here, we can't have you here. And off he went. And he still, up dad, down dad, up dad. This up never went away. And he was always focused on humor and fun and the positivity that he could bring to our lives, because I remember in my 20s I said to him, for God's sake, Dad, not everything is funny. And he said, well, yeah, it is, pretty much. And then we kind of chuckled about that. And then he said to me, because every now and then he'd come out with a jewel, And he said, you have no business being unhappy when the darkness isn't here. Because the darkness will do that for you. And you never know when it's going to come. So if you're not in the darkness right now, you have no business being unhappy. A little dramatic? Possibly. But I see what he meant. He didn't want to waste any of those good days. And good days turned into good weeks, good months, good years even, when he finally found what worked for him. But not without all of these additional obstacles and shame. My father, I found out later in life, the intense shame he felt almost every time he looked at my brother and I. What? We had a close relationship. I would never have picked up on that. I would never have picked up on shame. Oh no, he was so ashamed of his illness, so ashamed it would get us. We didn't talk about it. And then I started having my symptoms and sort of the world changed and tilted on its axis a little bit. And if you have a weekend, we'll get together and I'll tell you all about it. But in the meantime, things started happening and suddenly my dad was there. And my dad was the first guy to take me to a psychiatrist. I was 19. And my dad explained a little bit more about his illness. We did a little bit of symptom comparison, which you do. You try to top each other. Oh yeah, I'll see you and never get out of bed and raise you, don't eat for a week. We tend to, it's that kind of weird, but I think it's not so much competition as connection, right? I want to feel connected to this. So life went on and we managed, and sometimes I mismanaged, and then I'd manage again, and then I'd really make a mess, and then I'd clean it up, and then I'd do it again, and then I'd be on the straight and narrow, and then life. And when my father's mother died, the most distinct thing he ever said to me, we were at my grandmother's grave and he was tidying it up. So I have this very clear picture of him tidying up this grave, and I looked at him and I said, how, you know that I'm ill? And he said, yeah. Okay, did you always maybe think that could be the case? And he just kind of froze and he stopped and he looked up at me, and I'm thinking in my head, everyone, I'm thinking he didn't realize it. He didn't, until I was 19, and then he really saw it. But when I was 13 and 14, he didn't know, and all of this kind of stuff. And he said, I should have gotten you help so much sooner. I said, what do you mean? He said, I knew what you were doing when you were 12, 13, and 14, but I was so afraid that I gave you my bad blood. That I did this, and I did this, and I didn't know. I didn't know that. I didn't know that's how he felt. And then he was very upset because he thought then, at that stage, 35, whatever age I was, that I was going to resent him and be angry with him. And how could I be? Because by then I was a parent. And the saga continues. My son is almost 17, and he suffers terribly from anxiety, OCD, and ADHD. And the OCD can be so bad for him sometimes he can't get out of the house. It's awful. And we knew from a very early age that something was going on. And here's how the pendulum starts to swing. With my dad, nobody notices, nobody talks about it. With me, we kind of notice, maybe we'll say something, but probably not, but we're noticing. With my son, not only do we notice it, we talk about it, and we take action. And that is really difficult to do when you're depressed and trying to teach your child that it's okay to be depressed when you don't feel that it's okay to be depressed and you don't want to. You see what we go back and forth with this. But I think the lesson through all of this is that there has been movement. And for those of us that suffer, sometimes a lot, it may not always feel that way. We may feel lost or stuck, or no one's listening, or nobody cares, or I'm doomed. I know for me right now with depression, I wonder if the light will come again. Intellectually, I know that it will. Emotionally and through my heart, I don't know that in this moment. I don't know that, but it's okay. And we have to talk about it, and we have to put it out there. Ontario Shores has to be kind of a beacon for people to understand that not only is it okay, we have this amazing facility and these amazing people and these amazing supports and these amazing researchers trying to keep that conversation going and find some answers and help us to be well as we want to be. As well as we want to be. But there comes a time, like me, it took many, many years for that acceptance piece to kind of land a little bit. Because when it lands, you forgive yourself. You never should have been against yourself to begin with. But there is, for me anyway, a forgiveness component. I wish I was a better mother. I wish I was a better wife. I wish I was a better daughter. I wish I was a better employee. I wish. And to come out from under that and say, okay, I'm still going to have those days where I feel that way, but I accept them. I have places like Ontario Shores. I volunteer. I do the things that I know will not only build me up, but will build me up enough to build you up. Because that's why I'm here. Instead of saying, why did this happen to me, I say, why not? And I have a voice, and I have experience. I have 3 generations of experience to draw on what seems to work, what's changing, what doesn't, and I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of the conversation. And my ultimate goal, everyone, is that when my son is an adult, he can call into work and say, I am so depressed today, I can't get out of bed. And they say, that is fine, my friend. I will see you tomorrow, or maybe not. And nobody is rolling their eyes. If you had an epileptic seizure right now, would I roll my eyes? What kind of monster would do that? But if I tell you I'm hypomanic and you roll your eyes, how is it different? So for me, it's about teaching, living it, teaching it, sharing it. And that's part of the reason, and there's many of them, like I said, we could go on for days, and I'd love to hear all of your stories, because again, if we don't talk about stories, if we don't share our stories, we cannot connect, we cannot understand, and we cannot change. We cannot grow. So the fact that I get to be an ambassador of hope, that is probably whoever came up with that title, you guys, it's like the most moving, monumental title there could possibly be. How inspirational is that? There isn't anything better than being an ambassador of hope. That's just a tiny shred of my story in a few minutes. There's so many offshoots, but thanks for letting me share a little bit with you right now.